Why does evil flourish while the good struggle to survive? Why do children suffer while corrupt leaders sleep peacefully at night? Why is the world so unfair? You've probably asked yourself this question in moments of quiet despair. In those nights when you lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. Why does life hand out pain like candy to the innocent, while shielding the guilty with armor? The world teaches you early on, fairness is not guaranteed. You see the boy bullied in school for being quiet. You see the woman working 3 jobs and still going hungry. You see the war veterans on the street while war criminals give lectures in expensive suits. It hits you like a cold wind, justice doesn't always win. And what do? We pretend it makes sense. We create explanations. Karma. Divine plans. Everything happens for a reason. But when your best friend dies in a car crash, or when your father loses his job and can't pay rent anymore, those words turn to ash in your mouth. We want the world to operate like a courtroom. You do good, reward. You do evil, punishment. But that's not the contract we signed. In fact, there was no contract at all. Just life. Raw, beautiful, terrifying life. Some are born into palaces, some into poverty. Some are gifted with perfect health, others fight every day just to breathe. You didn't choose your country, your skin, your genes, or your parents. And yet those things shape almost every part of your fate. The truth is brutal. Life is not fair. Nature doesn't care about justice. It cares about survival. It cares about balance, not fairness. A lion kills the zebra not because it's evil, but because it must eat. The zebra suffers, and the lion lives. That's the law of the world. Humans, of course, try to rise above. We build systems, laws, courts, rights. But those are fragile things. Often manipulated. Often corrupted. History is full of stories of great injustice, genocide, slavery, war, betrayal. The scales are rarely balanced. And yet, in the middle of this chaos, people still hope. That's what makes us different. We still believe. In kindness. In truth. In some deeper meaning. But believing doesn't protect you from the storm. It doesn't stop the cancer, the heartbreak, the betrayal. The question remains, how do you live in a world like this? How do you find strength when everything seems tilted against you? Some people choose anger. They scream at the sky. They rage against the system. Others choose escape, drugs, distraction, denial. And some choose indifference. If the world is cruel, why care at all? But there's another way. Not easy. Not pleasant. But strong. The Stoics called it amor fati, to love one's fate. Not because it's fair. But because it is. They believed you don't get to control the world. Only your response to it. Marcus Aurelius lost children, fought wars, ruled an empire, and still wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not denial. That's clarity. That's courage. You see, fairness is a wish. A beautiful one. But not a law. And when you stop expecting the world to be fair, you begin to see it as it is. Harsh, yes. But also full of chances. Of meaning. Of moments that take your breath away. You begin to notice the man who gives his only coat to a stranger. The nurse who holds the hand of a dying patient. The friend who stays when everyone else leaves. These are small acts in a brutal world. But they are everything. Life doesn't owe you fairness. But you owe life your integrity. Your resilience. Your fire. The most unfair thing of all would be to let the cruelty of the world destroy the goodness inside you. To let bitterness rot your heart. To let cynicism blind your eyes. Because yes, the world is unfair. But you can be just. You can be the balance. The light in someone's darkness. The reason they still believe in kindness. You don't need to fix the whole world. You just need to refuse to be part of its injustice. That's where strength is born, not in comfort, but in resistance. In choosing what's right, even when everything around you is wrong. Let others cheat, steal, lie. Let them climb ladders built on backs. Let them mock truth and reward cruelty. You stand tall. You walk your path. And know this, you may suffer. You may be laughed at. But you will never be owned by the chaos. And that, more than fairness, is freedom. There's something strange that happens when you stop asking, why me, and start asking, what now? The pain doesn't vanish. The injustice doesn't fix itself. But you change. Because when you stop fighting reality, you begin to shape yourself into someone who can carry it. And maybe that's the only real power we ever have, to choose who we become in the face of what we didn't choose. It's easy to be good when life is good. But what about when everything burns? When your name is dragged through mud? When someone you love turns their back on you? That's when your character is revealed, not to others, but to yourself. Think about it. If the world were always fair, would we ever learn compassion? Would we ever understand courage? If no one ever fell, who would need to rise? Adversity is a cruel teacher. But it teaches lessons no comfort ever could. It teaches you patience. Because the world doesn't owe you speed. It teaches you humility. Because you're not the center of anything. It teaches you strength, not the noisy kind, but the silent kind, the kind that lets you endure without applause. And sometimes, it teaches you to walk away. To leave behind dreams that turn to nightmares. To accept that no matter how hard you try, some people will still misunderstand you, betray you, hurt you. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human. But still, the question lingers like smoke. Why does it seem like life rewards the worst and punishes the best? Maybe because the rewards we chase, money, fame, power, are not real measures of a good life. Maybe the world isn't unfair. Maybe we're just measuring the wrong things. What if the greatest success is peace of mind? What if the most valuable wealth is integrity? What if the highest power is self-control? Would we still say the world is unfair? Or would we start to see that some of the richest people are spiritually bankrupt, and some of the poor carry the strength of kings? You've seen it, people who have nothing and still smile. Still give. Still sing. And those with everything, choking on loneliness and fear. So ask yourself, who is really free? Fairness isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you live with what happens. And maybe, just maybe, life tests the strong more, not to destroy them, but to reveal them. That's why you can't compare your path to anyone else's. You don't know what storms they've faced. And they don't know yours. Besides, comparison is poison. It distracts you. It makes you believe someone else's success is your failure. It makes you forget your own growth, your quiet victories, your progress that no one sees. And let's be honest, many people only look fair on the outside. You don't see their pain. Their guilt. Their fears. Everyone's fighting battles you can't see. So why wish for their life? You have your own war to win. Your own mountain to climb. Maybe you were handed a harder road. But maybe that road will make you someone you never imagined. Someone unshakable. Someone wise. Someone who walks through fire and says, "Is that all you've got?" Don't wait for the world to become fair. It won't. But you can become strong. You can become kind. You can become unstoppable. And that is more powerful than fairness. Because here's the truth that no one tells you, life doesn't owe you a single thing. Not one moment. Not one breath. Every second you get is a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. So what will you do with it? You can cry. You can scream. You can fall to your knees. But when the tears dry and the anger fades, the question remains, who are you now? Are you bitter? Or are you better? That's the choice. That's the fight. That's the victory that no one can take from you. Fairness is a myth. But dignity? That's real. And it's earned, not by what happens to you, but by how you respond. The world is unfair. But you don't have to be. You can be the one who forgives when no one else will. Who tells the truth when everyone else lies. Who keeps their word when it costs everything. Who stays gentle in a brutal world. That is the rebellion. That is the power. That is how you win in a world that plays dirty, by refusing to play at all. You may not control the world. But you can control how you walk through it. That's where real power lies, not in wealth, not in fame, but in your response to injustice. Some people spend their entire lives waiting. Waiting for things to get better. Waiting for apologies. Waiting for fairness to knock on their door like a long-lost friend. But fairness doesn't visit the passive. It doesn't comfort the idle. It rewards the brave, the disciplined, the ones who choose character over comfort again and again. You were not born into a fair world. But you were born with the power to make it more just, starting with yourself. Think about that. You don't need a crown to rule your actions. You don't need perfect conditions to act with dignity. Even in the most broken system, you can be whole. Even in the darkest room, you can light a candle. Fairness may be denied to you, but the strength to rise is yours. So rise. Rise when you're tired. Rise when they laugh at you. Rise when the world says, you can't. Because every time you rise, you reclaim your power. Not over the world, but over your own soul. And isn't that the real war? The inner one? The one between despair and discipline, between rage and reason, between quitting and continuing? That's where battles are won. Not in courtrooms or debates, but in those quiet moments when no one is watching, and you choose to keep going anyway. Let others chase fairness like a mirage. You, instead, chase excellence. Not perfection. Not glory. Just the quiet mastery of yourself. The hard-earned peace of knowing you didn't let the world corrupt you. You lived with courage. With honesty. With kindness, even when it wasn't returned. You weren't perfect. But you were real. And that matters. Because if there's one thing more powerful than injustice, it's integrity. Injustice shouts. Integrity whispers. But whispers can move mountains when they come from a heart that refuses to surrender. You might never fix the world. But you can shape your corner of it. You can be the reason someone doesn't give up. You can be the proof that goodness exists, even here, even now. Don't underestimate that. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more light. And you, yes, you, can be that. Not through grand speeches or heroic headlines. But through the way you live. The way you speak. The way you show up every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what fairness can never touch, your effort. Your discipline. Your decision to be better than what you're given. That's the quiet revolution. And one more thing. Don't fall into the trap of revenge. It's tempting, isn't it? To fight cruelty with cruelty. To give people what they deserve. But that path never leads to peace. Only deeper bitterness. The moment you choose revenge, you become a mirror of the injustice you hate. Let them carry their own weight. Let karma do its slow, silent work. You, carry your soul intact. You walk away clean. Not because they deserve mercy. But because you deserve peace. You're not weak for walking away. You're wise. You're not naive for choosing kindness. You're courageous. The world may never be fair. But you can be just. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. Because someone is always watching. A child. A friend. A stranger. And your strength may become their map. Your grace may become their guide. So keep going. Keep choosing truth over comfort. Keep choosing kindness over rage. Keep choosing to stand, even when fairness sits down. That's how the world changes. Not all at once. But person by person. Act by act. Soul by soul. And it starts with you. You're still here. After everything. After all the disappointments. After all the slammed doors and unanswered prayers. After all the times you felt invisible, betrayed, forgotten, you're still here. And that means something. It means the world hasn't broken you. Not completely. Not yet. You may carry scars. You may walk with a limp. But you walk. That alone is defiance. That alone is proof that life's unfairness didn't win. Because it wanted to. It tried. Life wants you small. Afraid. Bitter. Easy to control. But you, somehow, you stayed open. You kept your soul soft in a world that wants it hard. And that's the rarest kind of strength. You see, most people adapt to injustice by becoming like it. They put up walls. They trade compassion for calculation. They stop trusting, stop caring, stop feeling. Because it hurts less that way. Because it's safer. But you didn't come here to be safe. You came to live. Fully. Fiercely. Freely. And that means risk. That means pain. That means walking through a world that makes no promises and gives no guarantees, with your eyes wide open and your heart still intact. You'll be misunderstood. You'll be mocked. You'll be called weak, soft, naive. Let them speak. Let them label. Because deep down, they wish they had your fire. Your freedom. Your refusal to become like the world that hurt you. You want fairness? Then be fair. You want truth? Then be truthful. You want peace? Then live in a way that protects your inner peace, no matter what the outside world does. That's how you rise. You rise not by avoiding suffering, but by turning it into something sacred. Into art. Into wisdom. Into a life that means something. And yes, it's hard. So hard. You'll cry sometimes and no one will see. You'll fight battles no one understands. But you'll keep going. Because you've chosen something higher than fairness, you've chosen meaning. That's the secret. Life isn't fair. But it can be meaningful. It can be beautiful. Not in spite of its pain, but because of it. Every loss teaches you to let go. Every betrayal sharpens your truth. Every failure humbles you and brings you closer to the ground, where the real things grow. You become deeper. Quieter. Wiser. Not loud like the world. Not flashy. But real. And there will be moments, tiny ones, when you feel the weight lift. When you laugh without pretending. When you look into someone's eyes and they just get it. When you help a stranger and something ancient in you smiles. In those moments, you realize you were never really asking for fairness. You were asking to be seen. To be loved. To be held. And you still can be. But it starts with you. It starts with looking in the mirror and saying, even if the world never gives me what I deserve, I will still give it my best. I will not live like a victim. I will not spend my life blaming. I will live on my feet, not crawl through this life on my knees. You get one life. One. And you don't know how long you have. So make it count. Not by chasing things you can't control. Not by waiting for justice to finally arrive. But by becoming the kind of person you can respect in the mirror. Someone who walks through fire and still smells like truth. Let others chase fairness. Let them shout about what they're owed. You build. You love. You rise. And if you ever wonder whether it's worth it, just look around. The world is full of suffering, but also full of souls quietly choosing goodness. Full of people like you, who see the cruelty and still choose compassion. Who see the lies and still choose truth. Who see the emptiness and still choose meaning. And that's enough. Not perfect. Not easy. But enough. So here's the final truth. The world is unfair. But that's not the question anymore. The question is, who will you become in the face of that unfairness? Will you become bitter or brave? Will you shrink or expand? Will you echo the world's cruelty or answer it with grace? That's your choice. And no injustice can ever take that from you. The world may break your heart. But it cannot break your will. You are not powerless. You are not alone. And you are not done. Not yet. Why does humanity, in all its advancement, still bleed from the wounds of hatred? Why, in a world that invented poetry, music, and medicine, do we still kill each other with words, with guns, with cold indignation? Have you ever felt it? That moment when someone looks at you not as a person, but as a category, a threat, a mistake. That invisible wall that rises between you and another soul just because you are different, in color, in belief, in language, in origin. We've all seen it. Some of us have caused it. Most of us have been its victims. Hatred is not an abstract idea. It's a pulse. A poison. A slow, invisible fire burning through generations. It hides in schools, in homes, in casual jokes. It speaks from podiums. It whispers in the minds of lonely people searching for someone to blame. It is older than nations. Deeper than doctrines. And stronger, at times, than love. But why? Why is hatred still alive? Maybe the better question is, what is it that we truly hate? We hate what we fear. We hate what we do not understand. We hate when we feel powerless, and hatred becomes a mask for our own helplessness. It gives the illusion of control. The illusion of superiority. It tells us, you are better, because they are worse. It lies to us, beautifully. From a Stoic perspective, hatred is a failure of reason. Epictetus said, it is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them. We are not born with hate. A child sees a stranger and reaches for them. Only later, when we have been trained to divide the world into us and them, do we begin to recoil. Hatred is not instinct. Hatred is habit. We are told to take sides. We are taught that there is not enough for everyone. That the world is a battleground. That if someone else is rising, we must be falling. That if they win, we lose. And so we begin to watch each other with suspicion, envy, coldness. But Stoicism says, all humans are citizens of the same city. That no matter where you are born, you are a part of the same cosmic whole. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, wrote to himself, "What injures the hive, injures the bee." And yet we live as if injuring others will somehow elevate us. How can it be that in the age of satellites and space exploration, we cannot cross the tiny space between one human heart and another? Because hatred is easier than understanding. It takes courage to try to see through the eyes of someone we've been taught to resent. It takes strength to listen. It takes wisdom to forgive. But anyone can hate. A coward can hate. A child can be taught to hate. Hatred requires no discipline, no virtue, no soul. So what can we do about it? First, we must recognize that hate thrives in ignorance. We fear what we don't know. We hate what we refuse to see clearly. That's why the Stoics believed in self-examination, daily reflection, and the pursuit of truth. Not public truth, not slogans or ideologies, but the truth of our own reactions. Why did I feel that? Why did I recoil? What am I really afraid of? Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Much of our hatred is imaginary, built on stories we've been told about others, or fears we've nursed in silence. The mind, when left unchecked, does not always tell us the truth. It tells us what is easy. And it is easy to blame others for our discomfort. But if you are to be truly free, not just from political chains, but from emotional slavery, you must ask yourself, what controls me? What thoughts rise in me like storm clouds? Who benefits from my anger? You see, hatred is often fed to us by those who profit from division. The more we fight each other, the less we fight injustice. The more we are distracted by artificial enemies, the less we challenge our own failings. Tyrants love hatred. Demagogues feed on it. It gives them power. It gives them votes. It makes them seem necessary. That's why the first step in breaking the cycle is to look within. Are you at peace with yourself? Or are you projecting your battles onto the world? Do you secretly want someone to blame? Do you look for someone to hate so you don't have to face your own pain? Because if hatred is a fire, then unhealed wounds are the fuel. And here's the hardest part to accept: hatred, at its core, is always self-hatred. No one truly at peace with themselves wishes harm on another. No one who feels strong and whole feels the need to dominate or destroy. Hatred is the roar of a wounded heart. So the work, the real work, begins not with them, but with you. Silence the noise. Step away from the tribe. Stop repeating what others believe. Ask yourself, with courage, what do I know about love? What do I know about peace? Have I ever truly listened to someone I disagree with? Have I ever tried to understand, not to win, but to learn? And more than anything, have I forgiven myself? Because a man who has forgiven himself does not need to punish the world. We live in a world where silence is feared and noise is praised. Where shouting gets more attention than stillness. But the Stoics knew that wisdom doesn't scream. It doesn't throw stones. It doesn't march behind flags. It stands still. It watches. It asks questions that burn like fire. Is this necessary? Is this just? Is this mine to judge? Hatred is the voice that says, react. But reason says, wait. That moment, the pause between stimulus and response, is where freedom lives. The one who learns to pause, to observe his emotions like clouds drifting through the sky, is the one who no longer lives as a slave. That is what Marcus Aurelius practiced every morning. He woke up not to plan conquests, but to prepare his mind. He reminded himself, today I will meet people who are selfish, rude, ignorant, arrogant. He didn't hate them. He expected them. And he trained himself not to become like them. This is how we begin to dissolve hatred, not by demanding others change, but by becoming unshakable in our own peace. There is no justice in screaming. There is no strength in rage. There is no wisdom in revenge. The man who responds to hate with hate creates more of the same poison, and then complains that the world tastes bitter. But the one who turns hatred into discipline, who lets it sharpen his soul like a blade against stone, that man becomes free. The Stoics were not passive. They didn't run from life. They faced it directly, with calm eyes and steady hands. They fought injustice, not with noise, but with virtue. Not with anger, but with integrity. When people spat at them, they stood still. When they were laughed at, they answered with silence. Because they knew, the highest strength is restraint. And that strength, you have it too. Maybe you forgot. Maybe the world convinced you that to be heard, you have to shout. That to survive, you have to hate back. That if you don't pick a side, you're a coward. But that's the voice of the mob, not of the philosopher. What does it mean to be truly human? Not just a collection of instincts, not just a bundle of reactions, but a soul with a mind that can choose. Choose not to hate. Choose not to respond to fire with fire. Choose to be the one who ends the war, not with weapons, but with understanding. Of course, it's hard. It's easier to follow your tribe. It's easier to believe what you're told. It's easier to hate an image than to talk to a person. But Stoicism does not offer an easy path. It offers a noble one. And nobility begins with self-mastery. There is a famous quote, "Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." That's what hatred does to us. It rots us from the inside. It pretends to be power, but all it does is keep us weak. It convinces us that others are the problem, so we never fix ourselves. But when you release hatred, something incredible happens. You begin to see clearly. You begin to notice beauty again, in people you once dismissed, in faces you used to ignore. You begin to feel compassion for those who are still trapped in the chains you broke free from. You stop blaming. You start understanding. You stop fighting. You start creating. And most of all, you stop fearing. Because hatred is born of fear. But courage, real courage, is love in action. The brave man is not the one who raises his voice the loudest. He is the one who walks into a room full of enemies and carries no shield. Who listens before speaking. Who chooses dignity over vengeance. Who, like a true Stoic, says, "Let them hate. I will remain who I am." And who are you? You are not your wounds. You are not your pain. You are not the stories others told about you. You are not what they did to you. You are not the hatred passed down to you. You are what you choose to become next. That is where your power lies, not in the past, but in this moment. Right now. With each breath, you can stay chained to the fire of resentment, or you can rise. Choose to rise. How? By doing the hard thing. The noble thing. The quiet thing. Walk away from the argument. Refuse to repeat the gossip. Let go of the grudge. Apologize first. Refuse to make an enemy. Look at someone you disagree with and ask, "What happened to you?" Not, "What's wrong with you?" And most of all, refuse to be reduced. Because hatred reduces us. It makes us small. Narrow. Predictable. It steals our imagination, our empathy, our depth. It turns the world into black and white, and our hearts into stone. But love? Love makes us vast. Spacious. Alive. And love is not weakness. It is not softness. It is a kind of strength the world cannot understand. When you respond with kindness, you're not surrendering. You're conquering yourself. And what greater victory is there? There's a moment in every life, quiet, subtle, but unmistakable, when you stand at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into rage, into tribal thinking, into vengeance disguised as justice. The other leads toward a quiet kind of dignity. The Stoics stood at that crossroads every day. And they chose, again and again, the harder road. Not because it made them look noble, but because it gave them peace. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply fighting to remain human in a world that demanded otherwise. He was a man surrounded by war, betrayal, and power-hungry men, yet he never became like them. He refused to let the cruelty of others become his own character. That's the first rule of life. You become what you tolerate in yourself. If you allow hatred to sit in your chest for long enough, it will change you. It will become your language. Your lens. Your identity. But if you sit with your anger, without acting on it, without feeding it, you will see that underneath it all, you are not an enemy. You are a soul looking for peace. Seneca wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." And this is what hatred does. It keeps us chained to a version of tomorrow that never comes. A tomorrow where we win. Where they lose. Where we are finally seen, finally respected, finally safe. But hatred never delivers that future. It only ensures that today is filled with bitterness. So how do we begin to heal? We start by being brave enough to feel. Not react, but feel. Let the discomfort wash over you. Let the old pain rise. Don't run from it. Don't disguise it with superiority. Face it. And you will see that hatred was never your strength. It was your shield. A shield you picked up when you were too young, too hurt, too scared to know any better. You can put it down now. You are not in danger. You are not weak for wanting peace. In fact, peace is the most rebellious act you can commit in a culture addicted to outrage. Choosing peace in a world of fire is not naivety. It's power. But peace is not passive. Peace is not closing your eyes and pretending injustice doesn't exist. Peace is seeing it, clearly, painfully, and choosing to respond with wisdom, not wrath. Peace is not silence. Peace is presence. Calm, unshakable, luminous presence. The kind that makes cruelty tremble and ignorance shrink. If hatred is the scream of a wounded child, peace is the voice of the adult who knows the way home. So let me ask you, when was the last time you really listened? Not to your side. Not to your people. But to the human being behind the label you despise. When was the last time you asked, what are they afraid of? What do they long for? What made them who they are? You don't have to agree. You don't have to approve. But to understand, even a little, is to dismantle the illusion of them. There is no them. Only us, still too afraid to admit how alike we really are. The man who hates you wants the same things you do, safety, purpose, dignity. But he's been taught that the only way to find it is through domination. That's not evil. That's fear misdirected. That's pain unanswered. So when you respond to that man with mercy, not softness, but mercy, you don't just save yourself. You show him a different path. And maybe, just maybe, he'll follow it. That is the work of a true philosopher. Not to argue, but to embody. Not to destroy, but to show a new shape of life. And it begins with the small things. The way you speak to a stranger. The way you think about someone who wronged you. The way you catch the first spark of anger in your chest, and breathe instead of ignite. This is not weakness. This is discipline. Hatred is easy. But mastery? That takes training. Repetition. Courage. Every time you choose not to retaliate, you are building strength. Every time you choose to wait before judging, you are building patience. Every time you look at someone and see a human instead of a threat, you are building wisdom. And one day, all those small moments will become your character. Then, when the world tries to pull you back into its chaos, when the mob screams, when the tribe demands loyalty, when injustice surrounds you, you will not collapse. You will stand. Not because you are numb, but because you are grounded. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much to add more suffering to a world already burning. This is the path of the Stoic. This is the way of the one who chooses love not because it's easy, but because it's right. And here's what's beautiful, it only takes one. One person who doesn't hate back. One voice that speaks with calm instead of rage. One hand that doesn't strike, but reaches out. The ripple begins. The pattern breaks. The world shifts, not through grand revolutions, but through the quiet rebellion of a soul who refuses to hate. Let it be you. Let it start here. You may ask, what difference can I make? I'm just one person. The hatred in this world is too vast, too loud, too ancient. What can one drop of calm do in an ocean of fire? But that's the lie hatred wants you to believe, that you are powerless. You are not. One man choosing peace can change a family. One family choosing compassion can heal a community. One community choosing courage can reshape a nation. You don't need to fix the world. You only need to fix your corner of it. That means starting with your own mind. That means looking at yourself every day, not with shame, but with honesty. Ask yourself, what thoughts am I feeding? What emotions am I allowing to rule me? What grudges am I still carrying like stones in my chest? And then let them go. Not because they're forgiven. Not because they were right. But because you are no longer willing to let your heart be a prison. You were not born to hate. You were not made for war. You were made to grow. To feel. To build. To teach. To connect. To rise above the primitive instinct that says, hurt what hurts you. The Stoics taught us, nothing is more human than the ability to choose our response. Between pain and revenge, choose healing. Between insult and retaliation, choose silence. Between anger and understanding, choose wisdom. Between despair and hope, always choose hope. Hope is not fantasy. Hope is direction. Hope says, yes, it's hard. Yes, it's dark. But there is light. And I will move toward it. You will not always feel strong. You will not always be patient. Sometimes you will fall into the same anger, the same judgment, the same rage. That's okay. The goal is not perfection. The goal is presence. Get up. Try again. Be better today than you were yesterday. That's the Stoic way. That's the only way anything ever changes. You see, hatred does not die in revolutions. Hatred dies in quiet moments. In forgiveness offered when none was asked. In the softening of a voice. In the willingness to say, I don't understand you, but I want to. Even in war, even in prison, even in betrayal, a man can choose peace. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years behind bars. When he was released, he didn't seek vengeance. He sought reconciliation. That is Stoicism in action. That is philosophy embodied. That is the true meaning of strength, not dominance, but dignity. The world wants you angry. It wants you reactive. It wants you addicted to conflict, because conflict sells. Outrage keeps you scrolling. Division makes you easier to manipulate. Fear keeps you buying what they're selling. But you don't have to participate in the performance. You can step away. You can choose a different rhythm, slower, clearer, deeper. You can choose to think. To question. To breathe. To look a hateful world in the eye and say, not through me. Let others shout. You speak gently. Let others accuse. You ask questions. Let others build walls. You open doors. And when they call you weak, naive, foolish, smile. Let them. They don't know that silence is power. That calm is strategy. That nothing terrifies the system more than a man who cannot be provoked. Hatred will not go away overnight. There will be setbacks. There will be tragedy. There will be moments when the weight of it all feels unbearable. But you are not alone. Every time you choose peace, someone sees it. Every time you refuse to hate, someone remembers. Every time you act with dignity in the face of cruelty, you become a mirror, showing others what they forgot they could be. This is not theory. This is not abstraction. This is a way of life. A discipline. A commitment. To live without hatred is the most radical act of our time. To live without hatred does not mean you agree. It does not mean you surrender. It means you rise above. Because hatred wants to pull you down into its mud. Into its noise. Into its blindness. And when you refuse, you're not just saving yourself, you're giving others permission to rise, too. That's how it spreads. Quietly. Powerfully. Not through speeches, but through example. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth. He had every reason to be cruel, every opportunity to act on ego and revenge. But he chose the inner empire instead, the one that cannot be taken away by war or politics or death. And so must we. If we are ever to reduce the hatred in this world, it must begin in the one place we control, ourselves. No one can take away your ability to choose peace. No one can force you to hate. No one can dictate the tone of your soul. That is yours. Protect it. Tend it like a flame. And when the world goes dark again, as it will, be the one who lights a candle. Because the truth is simple, hatred ends where you end it. It ends with you. Does morality still matter in a world that worships success, power, and self-interest? We live in a time when you can lie, manipulate, step over others, and still be admired. In fact, you might even be rewarded for it. The louder you are, the more followers you get. The less you care, the further you rise. So what's the point of being moral anymore? This isn't a question from a philosophy book. This is the silent dilemma millions of people face every day, on the subway, in boardrooms, behind the wheel in traffic. Should I let this person cut in front of me? Should I tell the truth and risk losing the deal? Should I stay loyal when everyone else is playing dirty? These aren't abstract debates, they're moral battles being fought in real time, within real hearts. We don't talk about it often, but it's there, the quiet grief of those who chose honesty and lost. The bitterness of the kind-hearted who were used. The confusion of the young who were told to be good, but watched the ruthless succeed. In this mess, the very idea of morality begins to feel like an antique. Beautiful, maybe, but pointless. And yet, something in us resists that conclusion. Deep down, we feel it. There's a line that, if crossed, leaves a mark. A sense of dignity we can't quite abandon. A flicker of shame that tells us, this matters. Even if no one's watching. Even if we suffer for it. Why? The Stoics had a radical answer to this question. For them, morality wasn't about pleasing society, impressing others, or even getting to heaven. It was about one thing, harmony with your own nature. If it is not right, do not do it, if it is not true, do not say it, wrote Marcus Aurelius. Simple. Unyielding. And completely disconnected from external rewards. The 21st century is obsessed with results. We measure everything, likes, clicks, wins, net worth. We have become a civilization of accountants, always balancing the books. Did I win? Did I gain? Did I come out on top? But the Stoics refused to measure life this way. For them, the only thing that mattered was whether your soul remained intact. Everything else, fortune, reputation, applause, was a distraction. Seneca put it more poetically, what you think is punishment may be your purification. To the Stoics, suffering for doing what's right isn't failure, it's the fire that tempers the blade. You become stronger not by avoiding hardship, but by aligning your will with what is good, even when it costs you. And it does cost you. Let's not romanticize morality. Being decent doesn't guarantee success. Speaking the truth might lose you friends. Refusing to cheat might cost you the win. There are no instant rewards. Sometimes, there's only silence. Or worse, mockery. But the Stoics believe this silence is sacred. It's the silence in which your soul grows up. So, should we still be moral in the 21st century? Ask yourself this, what kind of person do you want to be when no one is watching? What kind of soul do you want to return to every night? Because in the end, the world may never notice your choices. But you will. You are the witness to your own life. And that is a responsibility you can't outsource. You see, the world may have changed, but the human heart hasn't. We are still creatures who long for peace of mind. Not the peace that comes from having everything, but the kind that comes from needing nothing you have to be ashamed of. That kind of peace, the Stoics called it freedom. And it doesn't come cheap. What does it mean to live with integrity when the world around you is built on shortcuts? What does it mean to be honest in a culture that celebrates the clever liar? What does it mean to remain just when injustice is not only tolerated, but expected? Morality, today, feels outdated. A relic from an age when people believed in gods, judgment, or eternal reward. But we no longer fear the gods. We've built systems, machines, and illusions of control. We no longer whisper to the sky, we talk to algorithms. And yet, the ache for meaning hasn't left us. The need to live rightly still claws at our conscience. Because even in this cynical age, we know something. We know that the man who lies to win will never stop lying. We know that the person who steps on others to climb the ladder never truly arrives. We've all seen it, success without peace, applause without love, victory without joy. And we're starting to ask, is it really worth it? The Stoics answered that long ago, no. To them, the only true victory was over yourself. Over your impulses, your fears, your ego. Over the urge to compromise your soul for gain. Over the need to be liked more than to be true. That battle, quiet, invisible, relentless, is the one that shapes your character. And unlike wealth or fame, no one can take it from you. You don't need to live in the mountains or wear robes to be moral. You need courage. Courage to say no when everyone else is nodding. Courage to speak the truth when silence would be safer. Courage to be kind when cruelty is easier. Courage to walk away when everything in you wants to stay. This courage isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. But it becomes who you are. And who you are, really, deeply, is the only thing that matters when life begins to fall apart. Which it always does. The Stoics didn't believe morality was something you learn in books. They believed it's something you train, like a muscle. Every small act of discipline is a weight lifted. Every choice to tell the truth is a step forward. Every time you resist revenge, you become freer. Not holier. Just more human. And strangely, this way of living doesn't make you fragile, it makes you strong. Think of Epictetus, born a slave, tortured, and crippled by his master. He had no wealth, no title, no protection. And yet his words have outlived empires. Why? Because he found freedom where it truly exists, not in the world, but in the soul. He wrote, "You may chain my leg, but not even Zeus can conquer my will." That is the power of moral clarity. When you know what is right, and you live by it, you become unconquerable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can own you. In a century obsessed with control, image, and influence, that kind of strength is rare. But that's exactly why it's needed. We don't need more cleverness. We need more character. We don't need more leaders. We need more souls that refuse to sell themselves. We don't need to go backward. But we do need to go deeper. Being moral in the 21st century isn't about being perfect. It's not about judging others or pretending to be pure. It's about being honest with yourself, completely. Looking in the mirror and knowing you are trying to live well, even if you fail. Especially when you fail. Morality isn't for the flawless. It's for the flawed who refuse to give up. We are surrounded by noise. Everyone is talking, performing, competing. But silence, the silence of a man or woman who does what is right without needing to be praised, that silence still moves us. It reminds us of something lost. Something sacred. So yes, morality still matters. Not because society demands it. But because your soul does. And when the lights go out, and you are left alone with your life, the only question that will matter is not, did I win, but, did I live with honor? You won't hear this on the news. No one will teach it in business school. But there is something more powerful than success, more resilient than fame, and more valuable than money. It's your moral backbone. And you only discover it when it's under threat. When you're faced with a choice no one sees but you. When the easy option whispers in your ear, and you say no. When you're tempted to betray, to hide, to abandon your values, and you don't. That's where morality is born. Not in theory. In fire. But let's be clear, this path is not for the naive. It's not about being nice in a brutal world. It's about having the steel to live according to principle when the whole world lives according to profit. It's about learning to lose the right way. And there is such a thing. Losing with dignity. With your soul intact. With the knowledge that no matter how unfair, how painful, how public the loss, you didn't become what you despise. That is a kind of victory the world will never understand. But you will. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest empire on earth, but his eyes were not on his throne. They were on his own heart. He reminded himself, just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. The rest. Meaning, success, approval, pleasure, even the outcome. Do the right thing, and let go. That's the hardest part. Letting go. You held your values. You stayed honest. And the deal went to someone who cheated. You stayed faithful, and were abandoned. You refused to gossip, and were excluded. You stood your ground, and were punished. It hurts. No philosophy can take away that sting. But Stoicism teaches us to see pain as proof. Proof that your morality was real, not theoretical. It cost you something. That's how you know it meant something. In this century of distractions, illusions, and moral relativism, the idea of personal honor might sound old-fashioned. But there is nothing more radical today than a person who refuses to sell out. A person who says, "This line, I do not cross." And means it. Even when no one is watching. Especially then. Because the real battleground isn't public. It's the space between stimulus and response. That tiny pause before you act. The flicker of conscience. The moment when you decide, who am I going to be? We make that decision every day, often without noticing. And those small decisions, they shape our destiny far more than any ambition ever will. That's what the Stoics believed. Not that you must be perfect, but that you must strive to be whole. Integrated. At peace with your own mind. And peace doesn't come from external success. It comes from self-respect. Seneca said, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." In other words, if your identity is built on the admiration of others, you will collapse when it's taken away. But if it's built on your moral center, on the quiet pride of knowing you lived well, then even disaster cannot break you. This is not philosophy for the monastery. This is philosophy for the battlefield of daily life. Because life in the 21st century is full of moral pressure. You're told that only suckers play fair. That ruthlessness is power. That winning is everything. And sometimes, they're right. The world often rewards the worst in us. But the Stoics never played that game. To them, winning through deceit was a deeper kind of defeat. Because even if you got what you wanted, you lost who you were. So who are you? That's the question this century is forcing us to answer. Not what do you have, not what do you wear, not how many people know your name, but, what kind of human being are you when the mask drops? In a time of artificial intelligence, digital personas, and curated lives, that question is more urgent than ever. When everyone's trying to be someone else, being real is a revolution. And morality is how you stay real. Not performative goodness. Not fake virtue. But a deep, personal commitment to what you know is right, even when no one claps. And no, you won't always get it right. You'll snap at someone you love. You'll lie to avoid trouble. You'll say the easy thing instead of the true thing. But then comes the moment that matters most. Do you face it? Do you admit it? Do you make it right? That's morality, too. Not never falling, but getting back up differently. A little wiser. A little kinder. A little stronger. The Stoics didn't aim for perfection. They aimed for progress. They believed life was training. Every insult, every failure, every injustice, a test of who you are becoming. And they believed the only failure was refusing to learn. So when you feel defeated by the world, pause. Ask yourself not, why did this happen to me, but, what kind of person will I be because of it? That is a Stoic question. That is a moral question. And it's one that no technology, no system, no ideology can answer for you. Only you can. Should we still be moral in the 21st century? Yes, because morality is not about the century. It's about the soul. And the soul hasn't changed. So here you are. Living in a world that often feels upside down. Where success is loud and virtue is quiet. Where money has more voice than wisdom. Where image dominates truth. And yet, something inside you still whispers, be decent. Be honest. Be kind. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just persists. Quietly. Like a steady pulse beneath all the noise. And maybe that's what morality is, after all. Not a grand theory. Not a list of rules. But a voice. Soft. Calm. Insistent. Saying, this is not who you are. This is who you are. You don't need religion to hear it. You don't need books or rituals. You don't need applause. You need only to be still for a moment and listen. Because it's already there, buried beneath fear, beneath ambition, beneath exhaustion. Waiting for you to return to yourself. The Stoics believe that morality is not something you build. It's something you uncover. Like a sculpture beneath the marble, it's always been there. Your task is to chip away what doesn't belong. And in this century, our century, that task has never been harder. Because the noise is constant. The temptations are subtle. The world doesn't ask you to be evil. It just asks you to stop noticing when you're not good. A little compromise here. A small betrayal there. A convenient lie. A numbing silence. Bit by bit, the erosion begins. Not in dramatic acts, but in 1,000 quiet moments where you choose what's easy over what's right. And yet, you don't have to. You can choose to live differently. Not perfectly, differently. With awareness. With courage. With a standard that belongs to you, not to your culture, your peers, or your timeline. That's where freedom begins. Because the great paradox of morality is this: the more you serve it, the more it sets you free. Free from guilt. Free from regret. Free from the burden of pretending. Free from the endless cycle of needing to be something you're not. And in that freedom, there is peace. Not the kind that comes from comfort or control, but the peace of inner alignment. Of no longer living in conflict with yourself. Marcus Aurelius ruled millions, but his greatest struggle was against the man within. His journal wasn't written to impress others, it was a fight to stay awake. To live justly in a world that rewarded vanity, corruption, and cruelty. He wasn't writing history. He was trying to hold on to his soul. So are you. You may not wear a crown. But you still rule a kingdom, your own mind, your own body, your own time on this earth. You are still responsible for the laws you live by. And you still have to ask yourself, What kind of ruler will I be? Will I betray my values to win? Will I numb myself to avoid pain? Will I mirror the worst of the world, or will I reflect the best in myself? These questions are not abstract. They're urgent. Because every day you make decisions that shape the story of your life. You're not just living, you're writing your legacy, sentence by sentence. And what will that legacy be? That you chased what everyone else chased. That you won a game you didn't believe in. That you reached the top, alone, ashamed, and empty. Or, that you stood for something. That you kept your soul, even when it cost you. That you became someone your younger self would be proud of. That you lived not to be praised, but to be real. In this world, that is no small thing. That is rebellion. That is strength. That is Stoicism, not as a historical curiosity, but as a living, breathing answer to the question we began with: should we still be moral in the 21st century? Yes. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because without morality, we lose the thread of who we are. Without morality, success becomes hollow. Without morality, freedom becomes chaos. Without morality, power becomes cruelty. But with it, quietly, invisibly, we build something indestructible. A life of character. A spirit that endures. A dignity that outlives the moment. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. For he is not permitted to prove himself." And maybe that's the challenge we all face now. To prove ourselves, not by what we gain, but by what we refuse to abandon, even when the world tells us to. This century will test your integrity. It already has. And it will again. But it's also giving you the chance to stand apart. To be the rare one who still believes in truth, kindness, justice, not as branding, not as a performance, but as a way of life. And the good news is, you don't need permission. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to begin. So begin. Today. With one honest word. One humble apology. One act of restraint. One moment of stillness where you ask, what's the right thing to do? Then do it. Not for applause. Not for outcome. But because it's yours. And in that moment, morality will no longer feel like an ancient burden. It will feel like a home you had forgotten, and finally returned to. Why is it that the least wise always speak the most? Why do empty heads make the loudest noise? Why is silence so rare among fools? There's a strange law in life: the less a person understands, the more they want to explain. The less they know, the louder they become. The ones who should be listening are always speaking. And the ones who hold wisdom, speak less, speak later, or speak not at all. I've spent years watching people. Observing conversations. Crowds. Meetings. Family dinners. Online threads. And if you're honest with yourself, you've seen it too. The man who interrupts everyone. The woman who never listens, only waits to speak. The one who explains everything, even things they barely understand. They're everywhere. And they're always talking. But why? Because silence is unbearable for the insecure. They need noise to cover their fear. They fill the air with words the way a frightened child sings in the dark, to feel less alone. Because to them, silence is a mirror. And they cannot bear what it reflects. They must keep speaking. Because if they stop, they'll hear their own emptiness echo back. They talk because it gives them a feeling of control. Of authority. Of relevance. Speaking is how they pretend to matter. How they perform intelligence. They mistake words for thought. Volume for truth. Confidence for knowledge. But what they really fear, is being exposed. And silence is dangerous, because it reveals them. A wise man once said, even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. But fools cannot stay silent. They must ruin the illusion. They cannot stand the weight of their own thoughts, so they bury them in noise. Have you ever noticed how those who know the least always have the strongest opinions? They are loud not because they're certain, but because they're afraid of being questioned. They raise their voice so you won't raise a doubt. They speak fast so you won't interrupt. They dominate the room so you won't notice how little they understand. But knowledge is quiet. Wisdom whispers. Truth needs no defense. It simply waits to be heard. And that's the tragedy. The world is full of noise. Endless opinions. Empty speeches. Fake advice. Self-promotion dressed as insight. The wise are drowned out, not because they lack truth, but because they lack the arrogance to shout it. So the fools win. Not because they're right, but because they never stop talking. That's why we're tired. That's why we scroll past so much nonsense. That's why we leave rooms early. That's why we feel lonely even in a crowd. Because the world has forgotten how to be silent. It has forgotten how to think before speaking. It has forgotten that to speak well, you must first learn to listen. You don't become smart by talking. You become smart by watching, by questioning, by pausing before you answer. Fools are always first to react. The wise are the last to speak, and often, they don't speak at all. Because they know, truth doesn't need performance. It needs understanding. But today's world doesn't reward silence. It rewards confidence, noise, performance. That's why the fools rise. They build careers on charisma, not knowledge. They collect followers, not wisdom. They speak in certainties, not questions. And the crowd listens, not because it's truth, but because it's loud. And what happens next? The wise stay quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they see no one's listening. And so the cycle continues. Fools talk. The world claps. And truth falls silent. But not forever. Because there comes a moment when noise collapses. When certainty fails. When lies fall apart. And in that moment, the world looks for someone who didn't try to impress, didn't fight to be heard, but simply understood. That's when the quiet voice matters. That's when the still mind is needed. That's when the one who has listened, finally speaks. And the noise fades. But here's the hard truth, silence takes courage. Real silence. Not the awkward kind. Not the passive-aggressive kind. But the calm, anchored stillness that comes from a deep mind. It takes strength to resist the urge to fill the space. It takes maturity to wait before responding. It takes confidence to sit in uncertainty. Fools don't have that. They talk because they can't not talk. You see this everywhere. In meetings, they dominate the room with vague ideas and empty enthusiasm. At dinner tables, they turn every conversation into a monologue. Online, they comment on every post, explain every topic, argue every point. They don't pause to think, because thinking is painful. Thinking demands humility. And humility is foreign to them. The fool fears being wrong more than he desires to be right. He wants to be seen as clever, not to actually understand. He wants attention, not truth. That's why he's always the first to answer, even when he doesn't know the question. That's why he has opinions on everything, from politics to medicine to philosophy, without ever reading a book. That's why he repeats slogans instead of ideas. Noise is easier than knowledge. But behind every loud fool is a quiet person grinding their teeth. Someone who knows better. Someone who feels the weight of the words they could say, but chooses not to. Because they know, when fools talk, you don't win by arguing. You win by enduring. And it's not just about intellect. It's about discipline. Fools are impulsive. They talk to relieve tension, to grab attention, to push away the silence they fear. But the wise hold their tongue. They speak with precision. They understand that words, once released, cannot be taken back. Every sentence has a cost. Every conversation reveals your character. Every opinion shapes your path. So they choose carefully. They wait. They listen. They observe. They know that real insight isn't loud, it's earned. And the deeper it is, the less it needs to be shouted. Look at any wise man in history, he was a listener first. Socrates didn't flood the room with opinions, he asked questions. Epictetus didn't shout, he examined the soul. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but his truest thoughts were whispered to himself, alone, in the dark. These men understood, words are sacred. Thoughts are tools. And silence is the forge where clarity is made. But we've forgotten that. Today, we reward speed. We reward reaction. We applaud those who speak first, not those who think best. We value presence over substance, volume over value, appearance over understanding. And so we are drowning. Not in ignorance, but in noise. That's why stupidity spreads. Not because it's strong, but because it never shuts up. It's always selling, always explaining, always arguing. And meanwhile, real wisdom stays quiet. It watches. It learns. It waits. Until it's needed. Because silence has a secret. It builds power. It gathers strength. It sharpens clarity. And when it finally speaks, it cuts deeper than any shout. One sentence, carefully forged in silence, can silence 1,000 empty voices. So let the fools speak. Let them burn their energy on noise. Let them flood the room with their desperate need to be seen, to be admired, to be right. And you, stay quiet. Learn. Watch. Think. Build something inside yourself that doesn't need applause to exist. Because eventually, someone will turn to you and ask, "Why are you so quiet?" And you'll smile. Not because you're shy. Not because you're weak. But because you finally understand, the wisest man in the room is often the one who says the least. There is something exhausting about being in the presence of people who never stop talking. Not because of what they say, but because of what they take. They drain the room. They consume attention. They create a fog where nothing meaningful can grow. Words should be bridges, but fools use them as barricades. They talk not to connect, but to dominate. That's why you feel tired around them. Not physically. Mentally. Spiritually. Because deep down, you know nothing true is happening. No listening. No reflecting. No truth-seeking. Just sound. Just ego. Just performance. It's like watching someone set fire to language and call it conversation. But here's the dangerous part, the more someone talks, the more they start believing their own words. Fools become intoxicated by their voice. Their words are never questioned, never challenged, never examined. So they build entire worlds out of illusions. And they live in them. They make bold claims. They give unsolicited advice. They critique, predict, and preach. And no one stops them, because they never pause long enough to be interrupted. It's a form of self-hypnosis. And it's contagious. Because eventually, you start to wonder, should I speak more too? Should I act like them? Should I talk even when I have nothing to say, just so I won't be ignored? But that's the trap. Wisdom doesn't fight noise with more noise. It fights with presence. With restraint. With the confidence to hold silence like a sword. Most people are terrified of silence, but the wise walk with it like an old friend. Seneca once said that most men talk because they're not capable of being alone with their thoughts. That's the real issue. It's not just a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of inner structure. They don't know how to exist without performing. Without proving something. Without narrating their life in real time to anyone who will listen. Because silence forces a confrontation with the self. And that's a war most people aren't prepared to fight. So they talk. They gossip. They dramatize. They inflate small things into big things just to have something to say. Because silence, to them, feels like death. But to the wise, it feels like life. Real silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of reflection. Full of awareness. Full of truth waiting to be spoken. And when that truth finally arrives, it's quiet. But it moves mountains. The wise understand timing. They don't speak because they can, they speak because the moment calls for it. And when they do, their words land like thunder. Not because they're loud, but because they're true. The fool, on the other hand, speaks just to fill the air. Like a child banging pots, hoping someone notices. They crave reaction. They need it. It's their oxygen. And if they don't get it, they panic. They escalate. They talk even more. But no one becomes wiser by talking more. No one becomes stronger by shouting. And no one becomes right just because they speak with confidence. That's the lie we've been sold. True confidence is quiet. It has nothing to prove. It doesn't need to speak every time it feels something. It doesn't need to correct everyone, comment on everything, or have the last word. It's content with not being heard. Because it knows what it knows, and that's enough. This is why the wisest people often go unnoticed. Because they don't advertise their wisdom. They don't explain themselves to the crowd. They don't correct fools. They don't engage in every battle. They let their life speak louder than their voice. And here's the paradox, the quieter they are, the more power they gain. People begin to notice. To lean in. To ask, what do you think? And when they finally answer, it means something. Not because of what is said, but because of who says it, and how rarely. There is a kind of gravity to restraint. A magnetism to mystery. When you're silent, people fill in the gaps with curiosity. They sense depth. They sense discipline. And they listen, because you don't speak often. And when you do, it's not noise. It's substance. So train yourself in silence. Use it as a tool, not a cage. Don't speak to fill the space. Don't speak to be noticed. Speak only when it matters. Speak only when it adds. And until then, watch. Listen. Learn. Because the fool is always eager to teach. But the wise remain forever students. But the most dangerous thing about those who speak too much, is that they don't just waste time. They shape reality. They influence others. They distort the atmosphere. One fool with a loud mouth can lower the standard of a room, a team, a society. Because words are not neutral. They carry weight. They create momentum. They build or they break. And when used without care, they poison the air. Fools don't speak to build, they speak to feel bigger. Every sentence is a mirror in which they try to see themselves as important. And what's terrifying is how effective it is. People begin to believe them, not because they make sense, but because they repeat themselves. Often. Confidently. Without pause. In a noisy world, consistency sounds like truth. Even when it's not. And so stupidity spreads not like fire, but like fog. Slowly. Quietly. Unnoticed at first. One assumption here. One lie dressed as fact there. One confidently delivered half-truth passed off as wisdom. Over time, the fog thickens. And what was once common sense becomes controversial. What was once obvious must now be defended. And the wise find themselves surrounded, not by enemies, but by noise. But there's another layer to this. The fool never sees the damage he causes. He leaves a trail of broken conversations, derailed meetings, shallow debates, drained listeners, and walks away feeling victorious. Why? Because he got to speak. That alone makes him feel powerful. He believes the more he talks, the more he controls the room. And in a strange way, he's right. Because while he talks, no one else can. This is the cost of unchecked speech. Not just misinformation, but silencing. People stop offering ideas. They retreat. They think, what's the point? And slowly, the room gets quieter, not because people have nothing to say, but because they've learned their words won't be heard. That's what the fool steals, space. And the wise? They don't fight for space. They withdraw. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. They know that shouting over a fool doesn't make you smart. It just makes you tired. So they step back. They save their energy for when it matters. But let's be clear, silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's avoidance. Sometimes it's fear disguised as dignity. True silence, the kind that flows from depth, discipline, and understanding, is rare. The rest is just hesitation. And that's the challenge. If you stay silent too long, you abandon the field. You let the loudest person define the terms. Set the tone. Shape the story. So what do? You learn when to speak. Not often. But precisely. You learn to use silence as a strategy, not as a shield. You listen with intensity. You study the energy of the room. And then, when the time comes, you strike. Not with anger. Not with noise. But with clarity. A single clear sentence, placed in the right moment, can break 1,000 foolish words. Because truth, when spoken with precision, doesn't need volume. It only needs timing. And courage. But you can't reach that level unless you train for it. Unless you develop the strength to wait. The discipline to say nothing. The confidence to know your silence is not weakness, it's your weapon. That's what separates the wise from the merely quiet. Fools talk to be heard. The passive stay silent to avoid trouble. But the wise? They speak to cut through fog. And they've earned that right, by staying silent long enough to see clearly. And there's another truth the fool never learns. The more you speak, the more you reveal. You reveal your ignorance. Your insecurity. Your desperation to be seen. Fools think they're hiding behind their words, but every sentence peels back another layer of who they really are. And that's the great irony. The ones who speak least often hold the most mystery. The ones who speak most are often the easiest to read. So let them talk. Let them spill everything. Let them expose themselves. And in that space, build yourself. Build your insight. Your patience. Your clarity. And then one day, when you finally speak, they'll all feel the difference. Because your words will be rooted in silence. Forged in restraint. Sharpened by thought. That's the kind of speech that changes people. Not loud. Not long. But true. And in a world addicted to noise, that kind of truth is revolutionary. So speak less. Not to be polite. Not to be passive. But to prepare. Let others talk themselves in circles. Let them run out of breath. Let them reveal their gaps. And you? Be the one who listens. The one who sees. The one who waits. And then, when the moment comes, cut through the noise. With one line. One sentence. And walk away. Because wisdom doesn't need applause. It only needs silence, and the strength to break it when it's time. What if the most powerful man in history stood in front of you, not to admire your achievements or your image, but simply to ask you one question: is this truly the life you were meant to live? No anger. No judgment. Just a silence that pierces deeper than any rebuke. A silence that comes not from disappointment, but from recognition. Recognition that you, like so many, have drifted far from your own nature. That somewhere along the line, you stopped asking the only question that matters: what kind of person am I becoming? If Marcus Aurelius walked into your life today, he wouldn't be impressed by your apartment or your titles. He wouldn't ask how many people follow you or what you do for a living. He would listen, carefully, quietly, to how you speak about your own life. And in your voice, he would hear everything: your restlessness, your hidden fears, your longing to matter. He would not raise his voice. He would not need to. Because when someone who has faced death, betrayal, plague, war, and the weight of ruling an empire speaks, he doesn't need to shout. Truth does not shout. It simply stands there and waits to be heard. And you would hear it. In that moment, you would know, your excuses are too small. Your distractions are too loud. And your soul is starving for something more. You check your phone before you even get out of bed. Notifications, headlines, noise. You carry it into the shower, into meals, into conversations. You are never truly alone. And yet, you are lonelier than ever. Not because the world has turned its back on you, but because you've turned your back on your own stillness. Marcus knew that kind of loneliness. He ruled the known world but wrote his meditations alone, in the cold. Not for glory. Not for anyone else. Just to stay sane. Just to stay human. Each morning he returned to himself, to remember who he was, and what he must do. He would ask, is my soul prepared for today? Am I living according to nature, or am I being pulled by passion, by fear, by vanity? He would look at you, not with contempt, but with concern. Because he would see the truth you already suspect, that you are constantly reacting, constantly reaching, constantly chasing. But rarely choosing. He would ask, who told you you needed more? And you wouldn't have an answer. Because it wasn't a person, it was the world around you. The constant hum of comparison. The culture of urgency. The illusion that if you stop moving, you'll fall behind. But Marcus would say, fall behind what? Because what is the race? And where does it lead? He would remind you, there is no finish line for desire. The more you feed it, the hungrier it grows. The more you chase happiness in things outside yourself, the more those things own you. He would tell you what he told himself: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But not the kind of strength that flexes or dominates. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that can sit still in a storm. And if you argued, said you're overwhelmed, said the world today is more complicated than his ever was, he would listen. And then he would say, yes. But has human nature changed? Do you not still fear? Do you not still crave? Do you not still die? Because beneath the noise, the code, the concrete, and the endless scroll, nothing has changed. You still wake up and ask, why am I doing this? You still go to bed wondering if any of it matters. You still ache for peace, for clarity, for meaning. He would not give you a new app, a new system, or a new technique. He would give you a mirror. A mirror that reflects not your face, but your character. And he would say, this is where the work begins. He would ask, are your actions aligned with your principles? Do you even know what your principles are? And the silence that followed would be the first honest moment you've had in a long time. Marcus didn't write to impress. He wrote to survive. To remind himself daily that death could come at any moment, and that he must therefore live now. Fully. Honestly. Without excuse. He would look at you and say, "You act like you'll live forever. But you won't." And that's your liberation. Because when you accept the shortness of life, you stop wasting it. You stop postponing conversations. You stop numbing your emotions. You stop chasing what you never needed in the first place. You return to yourself. He would see your pain, the one you hide from others. The quiet anxiety. The low hum of disappointment. The questions that keep you up at night. And he wouldn't call you broken. He would call you untrained. Because he believed the mind could be shaped, like the body. And that the soul could become strong, if you stopped feeding it lies. So he would challenge you. Not to hustle. Not to succeed. But to live. Live in accordance with your nature. Live with reason. Live with discipline. Live with virtue. Live without needing anyone's approval, not even his. And if you listened, truly listened, you would feel something ancient stir within you. Something that has been waiting, patiently, beneath the noise. A clarity. A calm. A command. The world tells you to consume. Marcus would tell you to reflect. The world says to express. Marcus would say, understand. The world demands performance. Marcus demands truth. And in that truth, you would finally remember, your life is not an accident. It is a task. It is a test. And it is yours to complete. You might wonder, what exactly would he want you to do? Quit your job? Delete your social media? Move into the woods? No. Marcus Aurelius wouldn't ask you to abandon the world. He would ask you to stop being a prisoner inside it. You don't need to disappear. You need to wake up. He would say, get out of your own way. Because the greatest obstacles in your life are not the economy, your boss, or your family. They're the thoughts you've rehearsed so often, you mistake them for truth. The belief that you're not ready. That you're not enough. That other people's opinions determine your worth. Marcus would call those what they are, illusions. He would teach you not to fight them with willpower, but to dissolve them with reason. He would ask, where is it written that you must please everyone? Where is it written that failure is fatal? Where is it written that comfort is the goal of life? And you wouldn't have answers. Only habits. But he would remind you, habits are not fate. They're just grooves in the mind. And every day is a chance to carve a new one. You might tell him about your stress. About how everything feels urgent. That you're constantly busy, constantly chasing, constantly behind. He would nod. He lived with pressure. With armies at the borders. With betrayal in his court. With death all around. He had every reason to lose his mind, but he didn't. Because Marcus knew the difference between what's urgent and what's important. Urgent is noise. Important is soul. He would tell you, don't be pulled like a puppet by what others demand. Return to yourself. He would see how fragmented your attention has become. How often you jump from task to task, message to message, never really being anywhere. Never really being present. He would not scold you. He would simply ask, how can a mind that's scattered ever be at peace? Peace does not come from escaping life. It comes from facing it, with clarity, and without illusion. Marcus wrote, nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. But you must build that retreat. Every day. With the bricks of discipline, simplicity, and reflection. And that's where he'd point next, discipline. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that frees. The kind that tells you, you don't need to check your phone right now. You don't need to respond to everything. You don't need to be available to everyone. You need only to be loyal to yourself. That means setting boundaries, not to shut the world out, but to keep your soul from being diluted. That means saying no, not because you're selfish, but because you've remembered what you stand for. That means doing what's right, not what's easy. He would say, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Imagine if you lived by that. Imagine how much simpler your life would become. Imagine how much clearer your mind would feel. He would walk with you through a single day. Not to fix it. Just to observe it. He would see when you betray your values to avoid discomfort. When you act out of fear of being disliked. When you avoid silence because it might force you to hear your own thoughts. And then, gently, he would ask, what are you so afraid of? Because at the root of it all, every excuse, every delay, every avoidance, is fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of not being enough. But Marcus would remind you, it is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live. He would tell you, you are dying right now, not someday, not later. Time is draining out of you. Don't wait to be who you were meant to be. He would look you in the eye and say, you are stronger than you think. But strength without direction is just noise. What matters is not what you feel, but what you choose to do with that feeling. Maybe you feel overwhelmed. Maybe you feel numb. Maybe you feel tired. He felt all that too. But he didn't let it define him. He sat down each morning and wrote to himself, not because he had answers, but because he had to remember the questions. What is within my control today? What virtue can I practice, regardless of what happens? Can I meet this hour as a rational, decent, and courageous being? These were not philosophical games. These were tools for survival. And they still are. He would ask you to do the same. To write to yourself. To examine your thoughts. To interrogate your motives. Not to be perfect, but to be awake. You might feel like it's too late. That you've gone too far down the wrong road. But Marcus would say, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. You haven't failed. You've only delayed. And even your delays can become fuel, if you stop defending them and start learning from them. He would urge you to simplify. Not to have less, but to want less. He would say, receive without pride. Let go without attachment. Because your suffering doesn't come from loss. It comes from clinging. You're not broken. You're just tangled in things that don't matter. Marcus would cut through them with one question, does this help me become the person I'm meant to be? And if it doesn't, why carry it? He would teach you that freedom isn't about having everything. It's about needing less. It's not about comfort. It's about clarity. And clarity begins when you stop asking what the world wants from you, and start asking what your soul is trying to say. If you asked him how to begin, how to return to yourself, he wouldn't give you a complicated answer. He would say, begin with what is yours. Your thoughts. Your actions. Your choices. He believed there is a fortress inside every person, one that cannot be shaken by anything outside. But most people never enter it. They live on the surface, reacting, defending, pleasing, performing. Never stopping. Never sinking deep enough to hear what their life is really asking of them. That's what Marcus would want for you. Not more pressure. Not more hustle. But more truth. A life guided not by reaction, but by principle. Not by fear, but by virtue. He would not tell you to become someone else. He would tell you to return to what you were meant to be all along, a human being in full possession of their mind, their heart, and their time. A person with a purpose, not borrowed from the world, but found within. He would remind you that you were not born to chase pleasure or to fear pain. You were born to reason, to act justly, to contribute. The fruit of this life, he wrote, is good character and acts for the common good. And when you live like that, when you align with that, suffering doesn't disappear, but it becomes meaningful. He would say, don't run from discomfort. Don't seek to be entertained. Seek instead to be disciplined. To be useful. To be calm. And if you ask, how, he would answer, by beginning today. Not tomorrow. Not when it's easier. Not when you feel ready. Today. Because today is all you ever have. And if you can meet one day with clarity and virtue, then you can meet them all. He would challenge you to rise above petty grievances. To stop complaining about things that cannot be changed. To stop waiting for the world to fix itself. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That line would sting, because you know how often you've waited. How often you've postponed your own transformation. Telling yourself you need more time, more energy, more motivation. But Marcus would ask, what if you need less? What if the version of you you're chasing is already there, beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the stories you've told yourself for years? He would see that you are tired of pretending. That you're tired of feeling like a stranger in your own life. And he would say, then stop running. Stand still. Be honest. He would invite you to rebuild, not your resume, but your character. Not your reputation, but your soul. To do things not for applause, but because they are right. To speak not to impress, but to serve. To live not to escape death, but to be worthy of life. You might ask, but what if I fail? And he would answer, you will. But that is not what matters. What matters is whether you rise better than you fell. Failure, to Marcus, was never disgraceful. Only fleeing from responsibility was. He admired strength, but the quiet kind. The kind that faces loss without bitterness. The kind that meets injustice with patience. The kind that keeps going, not because it's easy, but because it is right. He would ask you to examine your days. To ask, did I do what was mine to do? Did I act with courage? Did I tell the truth? Did I help someone, even a little? That's all. No grand speeches. No perfect outcomes. Just the slow, steady discipline of being a human being who has chosen to live with intention. He would walk with you through your regrets. Not to judge them, but to free you from them. Do not dwell on the past, he would say. It is gone. Do not fear the future. It is not yet yours. Stay in the present. That is where your power is. He would see how your mind races, always calculating, always preparing, always fearing. And he would say, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. He would ask you to take responsibility, not for everything, but for your own soul. For your thoughts. For your actions. For the way you show up in the world. Not because you are to blame, but because you are free. And he would leave you with one final challenge, to live in such a way that if you were to return tomorrow, he would see a different person. Not because you've become someone else, but because you've become yourself. He would look at you, not as a student or a follower, but as a fellow traveler. Someone walking the same road, not toward perfection, but toward integrity. Not toward control, but toward peace. And you would realize, perhaps for the first time, that your life doesn't need to be spectacular. It needs to be honest. It needs to be lived on purpose. And it needs to begin now. Because that's what he would say most of all, begin now. Maybe after all this, you'd ask him, but what's the point of it all, really? Why should I care so much about being virtuous in a world that doesn't reward virtue? And Marcus would look at you, not with anger, but with something deeper. With sadness, maybe. Or with the kind of compassion that comes from knowing how many times he'd asked himself the very same thing. He would say, because you are not here to be rewarded. You are here to live in accordance with nature. To do what is right because it is right, not because anyone sees it, not because it pays off, but because that is who you are. He would remind you, everything around you will pass. Every building will fall. Every achievement will fade. Every name will be forgotten, including yours. But the imprint of your soul, that is yours alone. That is the only legacy that matters. He would not ask you to save the world. He would ask you to save yourself, from bitterness, from cowardice, from the slow erosion of your spirit through meaningless habits and invisible compromises. He would say, when you rise in the morning, ask, what is demanded of me today as a rational being? Can I be patient with others? Can I be strict with myself? Can I endure discomfort without complaint? Can I meet adversity without bitterness? Because for him, the measure of a man was not in how loudly he shouted or how much he controlled, but how quietly he kept his dignity, even when no one was watching. How calmly he walked through fire without losing the clarity of his mind. Marcus would remind you that true strength is invisible. It's the choice not to retaliate when you're insulted. The decision to remain calm when everything pushes you to panic. The discipline to do what's right when it would be so much easier to do what's convenient. He would say, don't become what you hate just because the world is chaotic. Stay rooted. Stay inwardly free. He would see how easily your peace is stolen. A headline, a comment, a delay, a glance, and suddenly your whole day collapses. But he would remind you, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every difficulty, every betrayal, every pain, it can refine you or ruin you. And Marcus would insist you have the power to choose. He wouldn't care about how polished your life looks from the outside. He would want to know, do you meet your fate with courage? Do you stand up again after you fall? Do you live in harmony with yourself? If the answer is yes, even imperfectly, then you are doing the work. And he would want you to know this, there is no final arrival. No moment when you become a perfect Stoic, or a flawless person. There is only today. And the next day. And the next. Each one an opportunity to return, to simplicity, to clarity, to duty. You would notice something by the end of your conversation with him. He would never once mention success. Not the way we speak of it. Not money. Not prestige. Not popularity. He would speak only of freedom. The freedom that comes when you are no longer a slave to your desires. When you don't need to impress anyone. When you can look in the mirror and know you are living as best as a fallible human being can, with awareness, with integrity, with courage. He would leave you with no applause, no great farewell. Just a single truth, one he wrote with his own hand during the darkest hours of his rule. Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. And then he would leave. Not to disappear, but because his role is finished. He was never meant to walk the whole journey with you. Only to point you back to the road you already know in your bones. And as you sat there, alone again, your life wouldn't feel so foggy anymore. You would see it, maybe for the first time, not as a performance, not as a race, but as a chance. A sacred, terrifying, beautiful chance to live on purpose. To start over. To become silent where you used to shout. To listen where you used to interrupt. To rise early, speak truth, act with calm, let go of outcomes, and greet the day, not with fear, but with readiness. You might not become a philosopher. You don't need to. You only need to remember what Marcus Aurelius would say, if he saw you today. He would say, you were not made to hide. You were not made to scroll your life away. You were not made to drown in other people's noise. You were made to think. To act. To grow. To serve. To love. And above all, to remember this. You are still free. The world doesn't care how you feel. It moves on, with or without you. If you're weak, it will crush you. If you hesitate, it will leave you behind. There are two types of people in this life. Those who react, and those who endure. The ones who react are tossed around by every wave, controlled by every mood, ruined by every inconvenience. But the ones who endure, they've mastered something ancient. Something cold, hard, and liberating. Stoicism is not poetry. It's not spiritual fluff. It's war. A war against your emotions. A war against your ego. And the Stoics left behind 8 brutal laws, iron principles forged through suffering, loss, exile, and death, that force you to wake up, stand tall, and become unstoppable. This is not motivation. This is not comfort. This is truth. And it starts with Law 1, you are owed nothing. The world owes you nothing. That's the first truth most people never accept, and it's why they stay weak. They wait for recognition, for rewards, for a sign that someone sees their pain and will come to make it right. But that day never comes. And deep down, they know it. Life isn't fair. It never was. The Stoics didn't waste a single breath complaining about that. They understood something modern people keep forgetting: fairness is not a guarantee. It's a fantasy. What you get is what you fight for. What you hold is what you earn. You are not entitled to ease, praise, or peace. You were born into a storm, and the sooner you stop expecting sunshine, the sooner you can start becoming the kind of person who thrives in the rain. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire. But even he wrote to himself every night, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's not a gentle reminder. That's a slap in the face. You could die tomorrow. And if you're living like the world owes you something, you'll die with nothing but bitterness. But if you wake up and understand, truly understand, that no one is coming to rescue you, you change. You stop waiting. You stop begging. You stop sulking. You start building. Every hour becomes yours. Every challenge becomes a forge. Life stops being something that happens to you, and becomes something you shape. But once you understand that, a second truth hits you just as hard. You don't control most of what happens around you. You only control how you respond. That's the second Stoic law. Control what you can. Ignore the rest. Most people waste their entire existence on things they can't touch. They shout at traffic, they argue with strangers, they stress over opinions, gossip, outcomes, forecasts. It's a nervous, chaotic life. They try to bend the world to fit their mood, and when it doesn't, they break. Epictetus had every reason to break. He was born a slave, abused, powerless. But even then, he understood something most free men never do: some things are up to us, and some things are not. That one sentence is enough to set you free, if you actually live by it. You don't control what other people say. You don't control the weather. You don't control luck, loss, betrayal, death. But you do control your choices, your reactions, your habits, your effort, your values. And that, if you truly claim it, is enough. Imagine standing in the center of a storm. Everything spinning around you, people losing their minds, news headlines screaming, plans collapsing. But inside, you're still. Not because you're numb. Because you're focused. Because you know what belongs to you, and what doesn't. You don't fight what you can't control. You adjust. You adapt. You endure. And while everyone else is scattered and drained, you keep moving forward. That's what makes you powerful. Not control over others, but control over yourself. And that leads us to the third law. If you want to win the day, you must own the morning. This isn't about waking up early for its own sake. It's about seizing the edge. The quiet hours before the world rushes in, those are sacred. Most people roll out of bed like victims. They wake up already defeated, already late, already overwhelmed. But a Stoic treats the morning like a soldier treats the battlefield. It's the first place you either win or lose. If you don't rise with purpose, the day will break you. Seneca once warned, while we are postponing, life speeds by. That's not metaphor. That's real. You're not tired. You're undisciplined. You're not overwhelmed. You're unprepared. The morning is where you decide who you are. You can scroll, or you can train. You can complain, or you can plan. You can hit snooze, or you can hit the ground running. One path makes you fragile. The other makes you unbreakable. Think of it this way. If the first thing you do every day is act with strength, silence, discipline, you've already won. You've beaten the first temptation. You've overcome the first weakness. And that changes everything. Because the first win leads to the second. And the second to the third. Discipline compounds. And before you know it, you're not just surviving the day, you're leading it. These three laws: no one owes you anything, control what you can, and command the morning, are brutal. They require honesty, grit, clarity. But if you live by them, you will start to change. You will feel resistance. You will face discomfort. But you will also feel something else: power. Not borrowed power. Not the kind that depends on luck or praise. Real power. The kind that no one can take from you. Comfort is a drug. It looks harmless. It feels good. But it rots you from the inside. It kills your ambition, numbs your instincts, and slowly takes away your ability to fight. That's the fourth law: seek discomfort on purpose. You were not built for a life of luxury and softness. You were built for resistance, for pressure, for discipline, for work. The Stoics knew that. They trained themselves to go without cold baths, simple food, walking barefoot, sleeping on hard ground. They didn't do this because they enjoyed pain. They did it to stay sharp. To remind themselves what they could survive. Because comfort breeds weakness. The more you give into ease, the less capable you become. You can't run from pain forever. At some point, life will bring it to your door. The question is, will you be ready? If you've trained your body and mind to handle stress, you won't collapse. But if you've spent years chasing comfort and avoiding challenge, then even the smallest problem will feel like the end of the world. Discomfort is not the enemy. It's the teacher. When you fast, you learn self-control. When you push through soreness, you learn persistence. When you wake up earlier than you want, you learn discipline. These lessons can't be read in books or downloaded in courses. You have to feel them. Earn them. Bleed for them. And once you do, something changes. You start to seek the hard things, not to suffer, but to grow. You stop fearing what other people avoid. You start craving resistance like a blade craves the whetstone. That's how strength is built. Not by wishing. Not by waiting. By walking through fire, on purpose. Then comes the fifth law: emotions lie. Reason saves. You feel angry. You feel afraid. You feel tired, hopeless, ashamed. But none of that is truth. Emotions are weather. They come. They go. Sometimes they make sense. Often they don't. But modern people make one fatal mistake: they obey their feelings like commandments. If they feel anxious, they hide. If they feel lazy, they stop. If they feel hurt, they retaliate. And this is how they stay small. Controlled by noise. Drifting through life without direction. The Stoics didn't kill their emotions. They didn't pretend to be robots. But they understood something deeper: feelings are not facts. Epictetus said it best: it's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In other words, it's not what happens to you that matters, it's what you tell yourself about it. You get rejected. That's not pain. That's a moment. You feel pain because you say, "This means I'm not good enough." But that's your story. You lose a job. That's not the end. That's a page. But you say, "This ruins my life." Again, your story. Stoicism teaches you to pause. To breathe. To challenge the first reaction. Because it's often wrong. You are not your anger. You are not your fear. You are not your shame. You are the one who observes those things. The one who decides what to do next. And when you lead with reason, not emotion, you win. Not always right away. Not always visibly. But over time, you become the most dangerous person in the room: calm, grounded, deliberate. Because when everyone else is panicking, you're thinking. When everyone else is exploding, you're still. When everyone else is drowning in noise, you hear the signal. And that leads to the sixth law. This one is cold, but it's sacred: you will die. You may think you know this already. But you don't. You talk about death like it's some vague idea, far away, not for today. But the Stoics meditated on death constantly, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. Not someday. But soon. And maybe even today. That's not meant to depress you. It's meant to wake you up. To snap you out of distraction. Because once you truly remember that your time is limited, you stop wasting it. You stop scrolling for hours. You stop caring what people think. You stop postponing your dreams. You start moving. You start building. You start living as if every day could be your last, because one day, it will be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." That's not poetic. That's urgent. You are temporary. And that is power. Because it forces you to choose. To act. To speak with courage. To love without hesitation. To live without apology. If you truly remembered your death every morning, how different would your day look? Would you complain less? Would you forgive faster? Would you do the work that matters? You already know the answer. That's why this law is brutal. It demands total presence. Not someday. Now. 6 laws. Each one sharp as steel. Together, they begin to reshape you. Not just into someone productive or impressive, but into someone powerful, unshakable, alive. And there are still 2 more. The 7th law is a brutal paradox: you must lose everything, on purpose. That's not metaphor. That's not philosophy for philosophers. That's real. You cling to your image. Your status. Your possessions. Your comfort zone. You hold on to them like they define you. But the Stoics understood, the more you cling, the more you suffer. Because nothing is permanent. Not your body. Not your relationships. Not your money, your health, your youth. And when they slip away, and they will, you break. Unless you've trained for it. This is why they practiced what they called voluntary loss. They imagined the death of their loved ones. The collapse of their fortunes. The exile from their homes. Why? Because they were cold? No. Because they wanted to prepare. Seneca said, "He is the truly brave man who is able to go through life without being broken by poverty, hardship, or exile." When you've already rehearsed the worst, nothing surprises you. And when you no longer fear loss, no one can control you. Imagine that. Imagine being the kind of person who can let go of anything, and still remain whole. You don't need the promotion. You don't need the applause. You don't need the comfort, the luxury, the security. You walk through the world with empty hands, but a full heart. You carry yourself not because of what you own, but because of who you are. That's a kind of strength most people never even taste. Because we're trained to accumulate. To protect. To hold tight. But everything you grip too tightly will eventually cut into you. It will control you. The Stoics freed themselves by letting go. That doesn't mean they gave up. It means they moved through life ready to lose, because only then are you ready to live. And that leads us to the final law. The one that makes all the others possible. The one that defines the Stoic path: do the work. Every day. Especially when you don't feel like it. Discipline is not something you summon in heroic bursts. It's not for special occasions. It's not a switch you flip when life demands it. Discipline is daily. Quiet. Unseen. Boring. It's a man showing up to train while the world sleeps. It's a woman writing a sentence while the kids scream in the next room. It's not glamorous. But it's what changes you. The Stoics did not care about words. They cared about actions. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. You say you want to be calm. Show me. When someone disrespects you, stay grounded. You say you want to be strong. Wake up early. Move your body. Face the cold. Do the hard thing. Every single day. There will be no applause. No reward. No one will come to pat you on the back for being consistent. That's not why you do it. You do it because it makes you unbreakable. When you show up in discomfort, in silence, in pain, you build a person no one can knock down. You will not always be motivated. Good. That's the test. That's where most people fail. They wait for inspiration. You don't. You move. You act. You repeat. Discipline is what stands when your mood is gone. It's what gets you through the valley. And in time, it becomes who you are. You begin to trust yourself. You say, "I will do this," and then, you do. No excuses. No drama. Just action. The modern world is addicted to emotion. But Stoics were addicted to consistency. It doesn't matter how you feel. It matters what you do. This law sounds simple. But it's the hardest one. Because it never ends. There's no finish line. Just another morning. Another repetition. Another test. And that's what makes it beautiful. You are no longer a servant to fate, or fear, or comfort. You've chosen your path. And every step, every drop of sweat, every quiet moment of struggle, that's your rebellion. Now look back. 8 laws. Each one forged in fire. Each one demanding something from you. But together, they form something few people ever touch, a mindset of steel. You've stopped expecting life to be easy. You've stopped chasing what you can't control. You've trained for pain. Mastered your emotions. Remembered your death. Let go of what you fear to lose. And above all, shown up. Again and again. That is what makes a person unstoppable. Not talent. Not luck. Not charisma. Discipline. Detachment. Inner clarity. You walk through fire, not untouched, but unburned. You are no longer a slave to comfort, chaos, or craving. You are something else now. You are a Stoic. And the world has no idea what to do with someone like you.